to just go over some technical details. You see up there the call-in phone number for audio. So most of you are probably listening on your computer, but if you do encounter any troubles with the sound, you could try calling in by phone as well, and sometimes that resolves issues. We will be doing a question and answer period at the end of today's web seminar. On your control panel, there's a place where you can type in questions. You can feel free to go ahead and send your questions in at any point during the web seminar, and we'll be keeping track of them and then going through them at the end of all of the presentations. Also wanted to let folks know that a recording of today's web seminar, as well as the PowerPoint slides and a copy of the full report that today's web seminar is based off of, will be posted on our website cacollegepathways.org. We also will be sending out a copy of the presentation as well as the full report to everybody who is listening on today's web seminar. Next slide, please. So I'm extremely excited that we have such a diverse panel on today's web seminar to share their expertise with you. We've got Paulette Castro. She's a student at Solano Community College and a former foster youth who's going to be sharing some of her own direct experiences. Emily Ives from the University of California at Los Angeles, UCLA. She works with their Guardian Scholars program at UCLA and is going to be sharing some of the things that they've done around priority registration. Nick Lawrence with Santa Rosa Junior College also coordinates foster youth services at his campus, is going to be sharing some of the strategies that they've utilized. Simone Turek with the John Burton Foundation, so she is the author of the report about priority registration, and so she's going to be sharing all of the information that she gathered doing the research for this report. And Dirisha Williams is a student at Fresno State University, also former foster youth, and she, like Paulette, is going to be sharing some of her direct experiences as a student with priority registration. Next slide, please. So really quick as an introduction, what exactly is AB 194, priority registration, the bill that created this benefit for foster youth? Basically, it's a fairly straightforward piece of legislation that requires all California community colleges, as well as all campuses that are part of the CSU, California State University system, to grant priority for enrollment in classes to current and former foster youth. It also requests that the University of California UC campuses do the same. So essentially, in a nutshell, what this means is that foster youth get to register, they get to pick their classes and enroll in them prior to when general registration opens for the rest of the student body. Next slide. So wanted to share a little bit of background about why are foster youth, why were they singled out as a special population for this additional benefits? And so I wanted to share just a little bit of background about what the research tells us about foster youth and educational outcomes and why it's so important, why it was necessary to create this benefit specifically for foster youth. So a couple of statistics: less than half of foster youth complete high school, and only an estimated 3 to 11% of former foster youth ever receive a bachelor's degree. So these numbers are quite low and definitely lower than the general population out there in terms of educational attainment. Next slide, please. A few other statistics that we know from the research. Studies have shown that the percent of youth who actually enroll in community colleges, 43% of foster youth enroll in community colleges compared to 59% of the general population. So you can see there's a really significant difference there. And the difference between those, the percent of foster youth who stay in school and enroll in the second year is even bigger between foster youth and the general population, 41% versus 62%. So even when you compare foster youth to other low-income youth, foster youth are still lagging behind, with 41% enrolling in the second year as compared to 48% of low-income youth. So you can see from these fairly stark statistics that providing some additional benefits to help these young people be successful in college was really warranted. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Simone to take on the next few pieces of the presentation.
Thanks, Debbie. So, you know, if you're a foster youth or you've ever been involved with foster youth personally or professionally, you can probably better understand why there are such disparities in educational success for foster youth. You may have seen firsthand some of the factors that lead to poor academic outcomes, and a few of them are just summarized here on the screen. Foster youth quite often experience placement changes, so they're placed in various foster homes or group homes or other types of placements throughout their childhood, and quite often these placements actually change, and sometimes they change mid-year. It's not abnormal for a foster youth to move several times during their childhood and their adolescence. And as you can imagine, you know, frequent moving leads to high school mobility. And like I said, you know, when this happens in the middle of the year, it's particularly problematic. And so if you're involved in the education system, you can imagine how disruptive this is for classes. It's easier for a student to fall behind, for credits not to transfer over, and really for students to miss key information that may have been provided earlier in the year before they got there. So this kind of sets them back early on. We also see extremely high rates of disability amongst foster youth for a number of reasons. And often these disabilities are not actually recognized or addressed in school early on, and so the problem is that students don't actually get the help that they may need. And then lastly, you know, foster youth are more likely to attend the lowest performing schools, which we know obviously impacts student success. So how does AB 194 help? You know, simply put, it makes succeeding just a little bit more, just a little bit easier for a population that has tremendous educational challenges that they're up against. Foster youth are up against a lot in life from an early age generally. So priority registration is an attempt to really target the educational piece there, and really an attempt towards evening out the playing field a bit. Quite literally, it takes steps to ensure that foster youth students are getting the classes that they need in the time frame that they need them. You know, there's a lot of pressure for foster youth, even those participating in extended foster care, to try to get their degree finished while they still have access to housing. If you're participating in extended foster care, for example, you know, after age 21, you're out on your own, and you usually don't have the family support that most other students tend to have. And for former foster youth that are not even participating in extended foster care, this is particularly important because you're essentially supporting yourself. And I'd like to ask Paulette to chime in here and just talk a little bit about why priority registration is so important to her and just kind of how it's made a difference for her in school.
All right. So in my own personal experience, I really needed a statistics class, and I decided to push it until my last semester before I transferred. But in my doing so, it actually pushed me back a couple of years because I didn't have priority registration. So I needed a single class, which was a math class, statistics, before I was able to transfer. And it wasn't until this actual semester that I was able to obtain the class. So for a couple of years, I kind of just took classes that I didn't need, just trying to get a single class. So fortunately, I was able to link up with a liaison on campus and obtain priority registration. And this spring, I'll be able to graduate with multiple associate's degrees, and I'm able to transfer in the fall.
That's great. Thanks, Paulette. That's good to hear that it is making a difference. So we're going to move on to talk about the report that really prompted today's web seminar. Last year, we surveyed California's 143 public post-secondary institutions about how they were implementing priority registration. And 92 of those campuses responded to this survey. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this report that is available on the California College Pathways website, by the way. So the research methodology, like I said, 92 of the campuses we surveyed responded, and that's about 64% of all California public post-secondary institutions. And it's about 61% of the community colleges. You can see the exact number of campuses on the right-hand side of the screen. It's 73% of state schools and 78% of the UCs. And as you can see on the screen, we asked a range of questions. I'm not going to go over each question right now, but I will briefly summarize the results of the survey over the next few minutes. So we're going to jump into survey results here. One thing we wanted to know about the campuses who responded to the survey was what level of support for current and former foster youth students was represented by survey respondents as compared to all campuses on the state. So really what we were getting at here was we wanted to see, how generalizable our results were to campuses across the state. And you can see there's three we kind of categorized support levels on campus into three tiers. And obviously there are campuses that I'm sure fall along this spectrum, may not be in exactly one category, but we did our best to really try to categorize them for the purpose of understanding how representative our sample was of the whole state. So a comprehensive campus support program has staff dedicated to providing support to foster youth and generally provides what we call high-touch services. So, assistance with financial aid, housing, and academic support, counseling, peer support, group activities. Examples of comprehensive campus support programs are Guardian Scholars programs or Renaissance Scholars programs. And then limited campus support programs are really more what we consider providing a range of different types of support, but generally provide more lighter touch services. There is assistance with financial aid, and there's limited general counseling. There's linkages to other campus-based services. And an example of this category would be the YES ILP, so Youth Empowerment Strategies for Success Independent Living program that exists on some campuses. And then last, the single point of contact only. That is really campuses who, they do have a person that has limited availability that is specifically dedicated to the foster youth population. They can arrange college tours, they can provide some assistance with college and financial aid applications, and referral to other campus services. And the good news is that within UC, CSUs, and community colleges, every campus at least does have a designated foster youth contact person in the least. And at community colleges that don't have more extensive services, the point of contact is generally the Foster Youth Success Initiative liaison. So the person that Paulette mentioned earlier as hooking her up with priority registration was that what we call FYSI liaison. So, when was priority registration implemented? As you can see, the majority of campuses implemented the benefit over the spring of 2012. One thing that we thought was really great was that only one campus that responded was still in the process of implementing priority registration. Now, we do know that it's likely that there are other campuses in the state who had not yet implemented and chose not to respond to the survey, maybe because they hadn't implemented. But we know, with this type of research, there's always some selection bias. But the good news is that a large majority had implemented priority registration by the time of the survey last year. And so this slide shows the number of campuses that were able to provide data on how many eligible students were on their campus. So how many current and former foster youth eligible for priority enrollment were on their campus, and then how many of those students were actually able, or of those campuses were actually able to provide data on how many of those students actually utilized their priority registration. So you can see that 46 campuses collectively identified 3,709 eligible students, and then of those 46 campuses, 15 provided data on numbers of students who utilized priority registration. We found that in that collective group, 70% of eligible students actually utilized priority registration. So something we were really interested in finding out about was outreach methods and the extent of the outreach that was conducted to identify current and former foster youth in the student body. We consider active outreach to include a process for identifying eligible foster youth and then notifying them of potential eligibility, but not everybody uses that exact method. And so we kind of, again, categorize them into three categories. The active outreach, which you see there, the 61%. Like I said, is where you identify, you use a process to really use targeted outreach to identify eligible students, and then you conduct additional outreach to the general population to get those that you may have missed. Limited promotion would be only using the second method that I just talked about, which is really when the campus just advertises the availability of priority registration for foster youth in general campus materials, then pretty much relies on foster youth to self-identify to the registrar's office. And then, of course, the third category you see is basically, very limited to no outreach, and you can kind of imagine what that looks like. And as you can see, the majority of campuses do conduct active outreach, which is really great because this is a key piece to making priority registration available and accessible to students. We wanted to also look at how much of an impact the level of support on campus for foster youth actually influenced a campus's ability or likelihood to conduct active outreach. So you can see that it appears, just if you look at these numbers here, that having a comprehensive campus support program for foster youth actually increases the likelihood that a campus will conduct active outreach. You can see on the left that, 83%, the sizable majority, of the comprehensive campus support programs, the campuses with those programs, did use active outreach methods. And so what actual methods do these campuses actually use that conduct targeted outreach to identify foster youth? What is that exactly? So three primary methods were really described when I conducted a series of interviews with campus professionals and in looking at the survey results. Most commonly, campuses seem to draw information provided by their students in their admissions application, so that, when they self-identify as the current or former foster youth. Also common was creating an outreach list based on information provided on the FAFSA, and then also based on who was eligible for the Chafee grant. Another thing we looked at was the combination of methods used. So campuses reported that they found the more methods they used, the more likely they were to identify more students, which makes sense. So we looked at our data to see how many campuses actually used multiple methods, or resources as they're referred to here. And as you can see, almost half of the campuses used all three of these methods, or resources. So in addition to targeted outreach methods, campuses who wanted to be thorough in reaching as many eligible students as possible, they'll conduct additional general outreach, as I mentioned a few slides ago. You can see here that word of mouth from other departments or from off-campus organizations is still the most popular form of outreach. Even with today's booming social media presence, Facebook, Twitter, it's still person to person, mouth to mouth, talking and just hearing about things from, people on campus, people off campus, from other students. And when we say visual media, we're just referring to flyers, information or ads in student materials, mailings, and then the presentations would include those done on campus and also at community organizations that serve current and former foster youth. And then, although not a common practice, during the time of the survey, 8 campuses were imposing additional requirements on students eligible for priority registration in order to access it. Now this number, I just want to kind of say this, has definitely grown since last year as a result of some recent amendments to state regs on education regarding community colleges, but we will talk about that a little later in more depth. So what I'm talking about here are campuses who, in a very small handful, basically say, well, in order to access priority registration, you have to also participate in our campus support program, or you have to, go to these orientations or assessment, or, kind of require certain things, certain hurdles to get to the priority registration. And like I said, community colleges now do have some additional requirements that they are required to implement, but we'll talk about that later. So another key piece of making priority registration accessible is having an easy verification process, if you have one at all. As you can see, the majority of campuses do require some sort of verification of foster youth status to prove eligibility, to verify eligibility. And the three most common forms of verification are broken out on the left there. The easiest way to verify students is really based on the list of CHAFE eligible students. These students likely have already been verified by financial aid, and that's why they're on that list. But for those not on that list, or for campuses who don't use this method, verification is done through the local child welfare agency or an authorized ILP provider, that's authorized to verify foster youth status. And just to, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but ILP is independent living program, and counties contract with providers to provide these independent living services. And so these are usually contracted nonprofit providers through the county. And so foster youth can be provided dependency letters by child welfare or by ILP, or the school can set up a direct link with the local child welfare agency or ILP provider, excuse me, where verification can happen without burdening the student. And so what that would look like really is a campus having sort of a partnership, for example, with the local child welfare agency, where they have a direct line to them and they are able to basically verify foster youth status for students, with appropriate releases of information without having the student bring anything in. And of course, this only works for students who are under the jurisdiction of that county. So if you have a sizable local student body, that's feasible, but if not, it's sometimes it wouldn't be maybe as helpful for a school with a local student body. So next we're going to move on to some short-term recommendations that came out of the report, and I'm going to also ask Dirisha and Paulette to chime in here at times as well. So the first recommendation is use multiple forms of administrative data to identify foster youth in the student body. So this actually implies, that the first part of this recommendation is to use what we call active outreach methods. And in doing that, to use as many different methods as possible. The three methods that we talked about earlier were use of the admissions application, the FAFSA, and CHAFE eligibility. Dirisha, can you describe the departmental collaboration piece that's involved here? What's been your experience with this on your campus?
We have a special liaison in the financial aid office who directly helps with CHAFE and recognizing who's eligible or who's a former foster youth and who's not. And she typically handles all that information, and then she'll meet with our Renaissance liaison and talk to her.
Great, thanks. Oh, did you have something else you were going to say?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. Okay. So the next recommendation is to use all available outreach strategies to communicate the availability of priority registration to students who may have been missed during targeted outreach. So we know that even if all of the identification methods are used, a campus is still not going to always be able to identify all of the current and former foster youth in the student body, in particular because a subset may choose not to identify themselves as foster youth initially. So conducting the additional outreach piece, really helps a campus get the word out to the general student body, and gives students an opportunity to take advantage of priority registration that may have been missed or ignored past communications. The next recommendation is use a single point of contact. So mainly, during the interviews that we conducted, we heard again and again that one of the most effective practices is to have one main person that's kind of the point person for priority registration. And this really speaks to the value of consistent and stable relationships, and it also streamlines a potentially complicated set of activities that, they can be complicated for the campus, they can be complicated for the student. And I'd like to ask Dirisha if she can chime in again and talk a little bit about her experience with having this point person at her school and kind of how this was helpful and how it worked at her school.
So I'm part of the Renaissance Scholars at Fresno State, and my single contact person would be Kizzy Lopez. And it's been actually a relief and easy because if we have any questions regarding school, financial aid, we can email her and she will go to the liaisons that she has in different departments and ask them, or she will figure out who can help us with it and directly connect us with that person. And the thing I like about it is that she already explains the situation, so that way it's easier on us students when we go to speak to the person. We're not going around in circles trying to figure out information. She already gave them some background information, and they already know what they need to do with us. So it's nice being able to just email her or call her if we have a situation, and then from there she'll either connect us with other people or see how she can help us.
Thanks. I'm going to move on to the next recommendation. So establish an effective protocol that ensures students are made aware of their eligibility for priority registration. So campuses that have been successful with implementation of priority registration tend to conduct follow-up with students who don't initially respond to their initial point of contact. They use phone calls, they text, they send emails, they do in-person notification during other points of contact, so counseling sessions or financial aid office visits, kind of all depending on who the priority registration point of contact is, of course. And a lot of people actually said in the interviews, they said texting is the only way to do it. They said texting is just the best way to get a hold of students, and that wasn't surprising to me. I mean, texting is pretty, everyone's doing it nowadays, so especially I would say the college age generation, texting is definitely, it makes sense to use that as a main communication form. And also just to mention that, when you're making contact with students and you're telling them about priority registration, it's also just really important to make sure that students really understand what priority registration is, and then even more important, why does it matter? Why would a student want it? So the next recommendation is minimize the administrative burden on students to verify their foster youth status by collaborating with other departments or outside agencies. So we talked about this a bit earlier. We know that the easiest way to verify foster youth status is to use Chafee eligibility if you're able to do that. And that can obviously be done by collaborating with the financial aid office. But for students not on that list, or for campuses who can't or don't use that process, they can seek verification through the county, like I mentioned before, that had or currently has jurisdiction over the youth dependency case. So, some campuses do use the dependency letter, and really what that looks like is their social worker provides them with a letter that officially states that they are or were a dependent of that of the child welfare system in that county. So that's a way to do it, but I would say that really a better way is to set up the direct verification process, either with the local child welfare agency or the ILP provider. And this is particularly a great option for community colleges. Community colleges, we know, have, they quite often have a heavily local student body. Maybe at UCs, you get more out-of-town students. So, at UCLA, you may get students who are from the Bay Area. You may get students who are from, anywhere across the state or even out of state, obviously. So it's not, I would say, as a promising practice as it is for a community college or just a school that tends to have a large local student body, but it's still helpful for those students who are local. And then, of course, it's always helpful to be flexible, so just to not be too stringent and to accept multiple forms of verification. And then I'd like to ask Paulette, if you can talk a little bit about how having a direct verification process is helpful to students, because I think you mentioned that does exist on your campus, and I just imagine there are a lot of other things that students are dealing with, and I'd like to just hear a little more about how that was helpful.
Oh, yes, definitely. So I actually have attended multiple colleges, but while attending the college I'm currently at, I was just asked to verify that I was a former foster youth, and I did verify it with the financial aid office, and thankfully when I did that, I no longer had to verify it for any other, like for admissions, for counseling, for anything else. Financial aid took care of it. They took my, I actually had a card that said I was a former ward of the court, so they took that in honor of a letter, and then I was just cleared. I've attended other colleges where I was specifically asked for a letter, and I wasn't able to get a letter because I've been out of care for so long. All I had was a card, so it does make it a lot easier too when they're able to receive different forms of verification as opposed to just a sole letter.
That's helpful also to know that, there is the dependency letter, but there's also the and I don't know if they call it the dependency card or if there's a correct name for it, but that, just again, to be flexible, right, and accept kind of what students are able to get, it sounds like. Okay, so this is really about, not requiring eligibility conditions beyond what is written into the law. And we did mention earlier that there were some campuses that were requiring kind of additional obstacles to access priority registration. And so this is really just our recommendation is, don't do that. Don't require anything additional than beyond what's written into the law. So the vast majority of campuses obviously are implementing the law as written, but there are a small number that are limiting eligibility. And as you saw earlier, it's about maybe having to participate in the campus support program or attend a series of required events. And so California state universities and community colleges are required to offer priority registration. And so while community colleges, as I mentioned earlier, do have some additional requirements now, state universities don't. And so CSUs really, they should not be implementing additional requirements beyond what's written into the law. And then this is actually a great point for me to kind of transition, and I'm sure some people are really curious about what these additional requirements are for community colleges. And some of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with them. But either way, I'd like to just transition over to have Debbie kind of talk about what some of these community college requirements are.
Great, thanks so much. Before I do that, I just wanted to say that I got a Q&A through the questions panel from somebody who said that she's an alumni of the Renaissance Scholars Program at Fresno State, and she wanted to second everything that Darisha was speaking to earlier. So just wanted to share that with folks. It's always great to get validation that we're on the right track with our recommendations. So in terms of the community college regulations, so there are new regulations that went into effect that say that students have to complete the matriculation process, which includes completing an orientation, going through the assessment process, and developing an ED plan in order to access priority registration. So these are new requirements that are in place that it's really, really important for everybody to know about. The new regulations also impose some restrictions on the back end for those who are eligible for priority registration, in that if students are on academic or progress probation for 2 consecutive terms or exceed 100 units, they can lose access to priority registration. However, although that's what these new regulations say, our understanding from the Chancellor's office is that they're actually redrafting these regulations again, and that there is going to be an exemption for foster youth from this provision. So foster youth are not the only population who has priority registration. Veterans have priority registration, and now people who participate in the EOP&S program or the Disabled Students program or the CalWORKS program have access to priority registration. So for this particular piece, there is going to be an exemption put into place for foster youth, but foster youth will be subject to the front-end requirements of completing the matriculation process before they have access to priority registration. Next slide. So the recommendation that we have in relation to this, because of these new recommendations, is that community colleges should make sure that there are systems in place that make matriculation requirements easily accessible in a timely manner. And this can involve prioritizing foster youth for these services. And we know that there's quite a range across all the different 112 college campuses about the accessibility of services. So, for example, if somebody needs to complete their education plan, at some campuses, it may be relatively easy to get that done quickly. On others, there might be a month or 2 month wait to get an appointment with a counselor. And so we recommend that special provisions be made for foster youth so that they can be sure to complete all those various steps in time to get access to priority registration. So this applies really to those who are entering into their first semester in community college. If they're planning to start in the fall, registration typically happens during the spring before, which means that all of those matriculation requirements need to be completed pretty early on, pretty far in advance to when the actual fall term starts, if they're going to be able to have the priority to select their classes for that initial first term. Related to this, for those of you who are on the call who don't work at a college but work with high school youth in some capacity, starting early, and we've always talked about starting early as a priority, but now with these new requirements, starting early is even more important. So really getting youth to start that process of applying to community college as early as January, if they're planning on starting in the fall, so that they can do their orientation, assessment, ed planning, have all their ducks in a row, so that come spring, when priority registration opens, they're able to take full advantage of it. And I'm going to ask Paulette to chime in here and sort of talk about her experience with this process and these new regulations, and just kind of share her personal experience with that.
All right. So I was just taking a break from school this last year, and I decided to come back. And because I only need one class, I really needed priority registration. So I had to go through the process of re-registering for the school, and I had to get an ed plan in. And I actually almost missed out on the priority registration date because I wasn't going to be able to get a counseling appointment until after priority registration. So I would have missed out on getting that class had it not been for a specific counselor being able to take me early on to make sure that I could get that settled.
Great, thanks so much for sharing that. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Nick Lawrence with Santa Rosa Junior College. He's going to talk a little bit about what's going on at his school.
Okay, can you hear me? Debbie?
Yep, you're good.
Good.
Yep.
All right. Okay, everybody. So what we have here at SRJC is we have when students apply to CCC Apply, I get an email that has their contact information, and then they get an automatic email from me saying, hey, I hear that you checked that you're a foster youth. Please come see me. Now, I get a very low response from that email, so I have a couple of former foster youth who are on staff, and they follow up with each student by email and phone, and I guess I'll add texting, as Simone suggested, so that we can contact each student. We're starting to get a lot of students coming in. We have about 277 students that have indicated that they're former foster youth. So then, beyond that and around that, we've got a close collaboration with our local ILP services provider, and that's an organization called Voices. And VOICES is an acronym for Voicing Our Independent Choices. And it's a youth leadership organization that is a one-stop shop. They have housing and a lot of co-located staff for housing, food stamps, transportation, employment, things like that. They do a lot of outreach for, not outreach, but they do a lot of support to continue education for foster youth. So we have a very nice wraparound together. And what we do with VOICES is that we promote the priority enrollments through the ILP classes that were I have the I have the contract for the Yes ILP classes, but they're the ILP service providers, so we actually are cooperating for those classes. So we promote through our ILP classes, we promote at their site-based organization and through one-on-one counseling. We also have a very close collaboration with our Sonoma County Office of Education, the Foster Youth Success Liaison there. And so when she comes up with students who are ready to come to college or perhaps are dually enrolled in high school and college, she will start sending people to us as well. I provide a higher education tour 3 times a year for CASAs, housing providers, kinship providers, etc. But I'm also out in the area frequently to many agencies training social workers, foster youth, kinship providers, so forth, because there's always new foster youth that are coming into our community who need support in getting to college. So the other thing that I have that's kind of interesting is we were able to put together, next slide please, we were able to put together some foster youth only classes for Counseling 270. And Counseling 270 is part of our matriculation requirement. And what I found is that there are a lot of foster youth so far that are interested in like the 1-year certificate program. Whether ultimately that's the right thing for them, I'm not sure. But there are a couple of certificates that are 15-month certificates, which means that you attend a summer, a whole academic year, and another summer. So the question is, how do you become fully matriculated while you're still in high school when you want to grab priority enrollment for the summer? And priority enrollment for summer is in April. So how do you do that? So what we did is we put together a Counseling 270 class for foster youth only, and that coincides right with priority enrollment for summer, so that if they take that, that helps them meet their requirement to be able to use the priority enrollment. And it's open to foster youth who are still in high school, and that's how we work through our ILP classes and our County Office of Education. And finally, we have what's called an enrollment party, which we hold at VOICES. And VOICES happens to be right down the street from the college. And I wanted to say, but I forgot to say this earlier, we go to VOICES for all verification for students. So any student that comes to us, we either fax VOICES, or we call them, or we send the student down to VOICES physically to get verification, and that's because they are the ILP provider and they have access to the database. So it's very convenient. We don't worry about it here. Either we receive a fax or they come with verification from VOICES. So finally, we have a couple of times a year, right before priority enrollment, we have a party at VOICES, and I am very fortunate to work with a very dedicated staff at Santa Rosa Junior College. And the admissions and records folks and financial aid people, they get to go with me, and we physically sit everybody down at VOICES, and they recruit for students to come to the party, and there's food and balloons. And a lot of times with foster youth, people have enrolled or dropped out. There's issues getting back into school, or they have a fine, or they weren't sure what to take, or all different things. So because we have someone from admissions and records and financial aid there, we can solve any of the problems that come up with get the green light to enroll in classes. So it's pretty exciting. The best thing really about SRJC is that we have a very broad interpretation of how we practice AB 194. And basically, if a youth had an open juvenile dependency case for one day, and they're under the age of 30 when they start college, then we're giving them priority 1 enrollment. And so that's really helping, because we had a high number of students who are coming here, like a couple of the youth who work for me, who are in foster care from age 3 to 17, and then were either adopted or went back to a family member and didn't qualify for AB 194, whereas youth who might have gone into foster care at age 17, they were getting all the benefits. So my college said, you know, that doesn't really seem right. So that's what we're doing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. So next we're going to hear from Emily Ives to get a perspective on what one of the four-year universities is doing with priority registration. So Emily.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here, Debbie. I really appreciate it, and excited to share a little bit about what UCLA does in terms of priority registration. Just to give everybody kind of a basic background of how UCLA, how we describe foster youth at the university. We take a very kind of general approach. So if you were in foster care for any point of your life, whether it was one day or up till you were 18, we code you as guardian scholars students. So this has putting AB 194 into action at our campus really takes the partnership of leadership at the university. So this is support from the Vice Chancellor, who then kind of can direct down meetings with our office and the registrar. The registrar, we've been really lucky to be able to work with our registrar at UCLA, who's very supportive of our Guardian Scholars program, and has really worked to kind of take this suggestion for the UC and really put it into place as something that we're going to uphold. So we've definitely expanded our interpretation of eligibility. So it includes all Chafee eligible youth. We have a fair amount of students who are out of state, who would, who don't get Chafee, but then would, if they were in California, would be Chafee eligible. So we include them, as well as any other students who have some type of similar situation. If students who are in ILP, then are ILP eligible, then we also include them. Our goal is really not to exclude students. It's really to make sure that we're including all of the students that would be eligible for this and should be eligible for this. Like I said, students who qualify for Chafee are automatically eligible, and we get that through our financial aid office. So there's no need for students then necessarily to contact our program unless they're interested in getting involved in order to obtain the priority enrollment. For students who are not automatically coded, meaning they're not Chafee eligible, I communicate with students via email, via phone calls, to try to let them know about that they might qualify for priority enrollment, and to please contact me so that we can discuss their eligibility. So we not only do emails and phone calls, but we also have events, we have meetings, we have a web presence, a Facebook. Really try to reach students kind of whatever way we can. Also sometimes students say they heard it from another friend, that if they said, well, I was in foster care, so I was able to get priority enrollment. And so word of mouth also helps between students. So students who, okay, so I guess next slide. So students who are not already qualified just come in and meet with me, and we can then kind of move to the next step, which is trying to figure out some type of verification. So UCLA is very, very liberal on what it accepts, pretty much anything. So we've had even students turn in or show me some court minutes and pretty much anything. However, if we do reach out to any outside organizations, we do need to have a release of information. And so that's really important to make sure that we're abiding by FERPA, and that we do not release any information to any outside organizations without the students' written consent. So not just verbal consent, but written consent. This provides a challenge, I think, to get some of this documentation because of the fact that we have so many out-of-county youth. So we have students, like Debbie said, from Northern California. We have students from San Diego area. We even have students who are also out of state too, so that's even sometimes more difficult to be able to connect and get these students the documentation to verify that they've been in foster care or some type of similar situation. So that has been one of the challenges, but you know, as long as we're working with the students and connected, then we can go ahead and get them coded for priority enrollment, and then, you know, sometimes it can take a couple months to get that documentation, and we're fine with that as long as we know that the students kind of moving forward with that process. When students are then going to select courses, we have them, we suggest that they meet with an academic counselor. We have a liaison in our academic advancement program, which is kind of like an EOPS office at a CSU or a California Community College. And that liaison is the one that meets with students to talk about you know, different classes that they need and requirements, and making sure that students are really, not only are they coded, but they're taking classes that they need to advance themselves. I think that's one of the challenges, is that students get priority enrollment, but then don't always have the class plan ready. So when they have the prior enrollment, know which classes to take and which classes are impacted. Thus, they should use a priority enrollment for those classes versus other ones. So I think that kind of the major takeaways is really that relationship with your administration is very, very important and crucial to making sure that AB 194 can be put in action. And I think also the relationship you have specifically with your registrar to educate them that not all foster youth have this experience that can fit into a box and clearly fits the legislation, can also help you expand some opportunities to include other students that might not fit in that box. Simone, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Simone, I think.
Sorry, Debbie. I thought you were going to, like, you know, bridge Emily to me in the next slide as our moderator. I apologize. I should have jumped in. So I'm just going to, well, you know, before I go on, I just want to quickly say both Emily and Nick were two campus professionals that I interviewed during this whole process of preparing for this this publication or developing this publication, and they really, as you can see from what they shared, had some great ideas and really informed a lot of our recommendations and just what we learned in developing this report. So I wanted to say thank you to them for that before I move on. But what we're going to talk about next very briefly, because I see that we are running out of time, is just some longer term, broader recommendations, and I will try to kind of whiz through them while still getting the point across. So the first one, educate departments across campus as well as key community contacts about priority registration for current and former foster youth. As we mentioned earlier, you know, word of mouth is key in getting the message out. So this really makes having a well-informed campus faculty important. And I'm just going to mention that, you know, the John Burton Foundation developed curricula for campuses to raise awareness, and it's also available on the California College Pathways website. And Debbie, you know, this was developed under the CCP project, and Debbie is I believe, the primary author of these different resources that I'm mentioning. And so if you have questions about them, you can probably, I'm sure, contact her directly. But they are available on the CCP website, which will be shown again at the end if you don't have that URL. And then just in addition, still on the first recommendation, staff at district high schools, you know, social workers, ILP workers, foster care providers, all these people off campus that interact regularly with current and former foster youth. It could be, you know, CYC chapters, dependency attorneys, CASAs, probation workers. You know, these people really interact on a regular basis with the population that you're trying to identify to offer priority registration for. So it's really important to also make presentations about the availability of priority registration off campus using those contacts. So the next recommendation, track the number of current and former foster youth in the student body, as well as the number who take advantage of priority registration. You saw earlier that some campuses do this and some campuses don't. Having data regarding how many students are being reached and how many students are taking advantage of priority registration is really important in order to evaluate whether a campus is needing to make adjustments to their processes and to really know, what's happening. Like, data talks. Data is an essential component of evaluating progress and for advocating for support. The third recommendation, if your campus does not have a comprehensive campus support program already on campus, consider what could be done to change this. So as you saw in the beginning of the presentation, it turns out that campuses with support programs were more likely to be able to conduct active outreach. And it's logical when you think about it. If you have more infrastructure to support this population, you're able to do more. And some campuses happen to have more support in that area than others, and you can only do what you can do. And so everyone's at different places with this. Some campuses have a support program, some campuses don't. For campuses who don't, the John Burton Foundation also developed a guide for campuses interested in developing a support program for current and former foster youth, and that's also on the CCP website. And I'll also add here that for campuses that have established support programs and they're at that point, there's still a goal here, and it's really to focus on advocating for the integration of support programs into your campus budget so that they don't have to rely on, private funding to stay afloat. Let me switch to the next slide here. And then the last two recommendations, develop a relationship with your local child welfare agency that reaches beyond priority registration implementation. So earlier we talked about the benefits of having a direct link to ILP or to child welfare for the purposes of verifying eligibility, verifying foster youth status. But if you kind of think of this on broader terms, ILP providers are great for connecting with current and former foster youth. You heard from Nick just how effective that's been for him or for his students over the years. The thing is though about ILP providers is that they only have access to youth who choose to access ILP services, whereas county social workers, and I mean in-person access, so they may be able to verify, but as far as in-person access and able to spread information and get the word out about priority enrollment and other services available to foster youth on your campus, county social workers, they're required to conduct visits with foster youth on a monthly basis. And so it's a great way to really reach a broader, to make broader reach for current and former foster youth, to really have that connection with your local child welfare agency. And so, and this is my last kind of plug for all of these various publications that the John Burton Foundation has developed and really that Debbie has played the primary role in developing here. But we have a publication that documents case studies of successful collaborations between higher ed and child welfare, and so that's also something you may want to look at. And of course, it's on the CCP website. And lastly, when AB 194 was written, a sunset date of 2017 was written into it. So what a sunset date means is, unless the legislature takes action, the law will no longer be effective after 2017. So we really recommend that people advocate for the extension of the availability of priority registration beyond 2017. And I have a feeling that Debbie will at some point probably organize some advocacy efforts around this, and I'm sure she'll let you all know about them. And I'm going to hand it back over to Debbie for some announcements and Q&A.
Great, thank you so much. So if folks do have questions, feel free to go ahead and type them into your question panel and send them over to us. We've got just a couple of questions that have come in during the course of the web seminar. I did want to let folks know about some upcoming events during the remainder of this month. On March 13th at 10 o'clock, the John Burton Foundation is holding a web seminar about a new bill that's been introduced. It's actually SB 1023. And so the link to that is there on the website. And if you go to the John Burton Foundation website, which is johnburtonfoundation.org, you'll also find a link to the SB 1023 webpage that you can use to register for that. And then on March 19th at 10 o'clock, we're going to be having a web seminar called Information is Power, Using Data to Inform Campus Support Program Design. So this is targeted towards a range of audiences, but in particular, campus folks about, there's a lot of new data systems being put into place so that you have access to more information than you've necessarily had before, but once you have this information, what do you do with it and how can you use it to inform the program design? And so that web seminar, if you go to the California College Pathways website, you'll see a link for registration for that. So next slide. So again, if you have questions, go ahead and type them in and click send. My contact information is up there, as well as the California College Pathways website, where you can get additional information. So the first question, Simone, I'm going to direct this question to you. Is there any research on support such as priority registration at private universities?
So we did not conduct research on the support for current and former foster youth and for priority registration on private university campuses, mainly because the report that we did and the research we did was based on Assembly Bill 194, and that bill just obviously mentions public universities, public colleges and universities. So we did not do that. I don't know if there is other research out there. That would be a good question, and I can try to look into that and see if we do have information about what some private institutions do. But during this process, we did not include them in the survey.
Great. So the next question, somebody is asking, one of the terms we've been using throughout this presentation is CHAFE eligible. And there's a question about what that means. What is the definition of CHAFE eligibility? And so I can go ahead and provide a little information about that. So CHAFE is a program that is part of the Education and Training Voucher program that's funded in California, both by the federal government and state. And this is a grant specifically for foster youth that provides $5,000 for foster youth who are attending college or university. In order to qualify for a CHAFE grant, a person has to have been in the foster care system and out-of-home placement at some point after the age of 16. There are also some age restrictions, so it goes up basically to the age of 21. In some cases, you can get a little bit towards your 22nd birthday. And if you want to Google California CHAFE, there's actually the California State Aid Commission has a whole page that goes into more detail about exactly what qualifies somebody for CHAFE grants. And it is a limited pot of money, so there are often many more students who are determined to be eligible for the CHAFE grant than those who actually receive the money. So I have a question. I'm going to direct this to either Nick or Emily, if either one of you have some feedback. So the question is from somebody who works on a college campus, and if they're having pushback from administration with implementing a foster youth point of contact and referral system, how do you suggest we work our way around that? Do you guys have any feedback from your own experiences about how to work with recalcitrant administrators?
This is Emily. I think, so depends if you can get, your chancellor, your president on board. I think that's the most ideal, and then have the directive sent down. Also, sometimes using leverage, depending on what school you're at, but other schools in your area, or like, for example, I would use other UCs or other comparable institutions, saying they do this, why aren't we kind of keeping up with it? So it's almost kind of guilting in a way, guilting your administration into it if that's another option. I think it kind of just depends who's not in favor of it. Also, our Guardian Scholars program is housed on the student affairs side of the university, so perhaps using the academic side of the university. Perhaps there's someone on your campus doing research on foster youth, or you have a social welfare program, social work program. Those would be all other ways that you could, other partners who you could identify for collaboration and or support.
Great, thank you. Nick, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of times when you find hardened hearts in this way, it's because there's a lack of understanding of the kind of trauma that the youth have been through, and people have stereotypes about foster kids being, bad kids, or what do they do, and so number one, people need to be educated, and then drawing on some of the data that's coming up is really useful, especially if you're trying to get in somebody in the student services aspect. They need to understand how severe the situation is, and then probably someone in financial aid can help paint that picture, because they'll know what the background is with the finances. But definitely, like Emily said, you have to find somebody higher up than you who's got some clout that can either go top down or across to say, hey, we need to do this.
Great, thank you. So another question about the resource guide that was mentioned to assist colleges to establish a campus support program. Where can that be found? So if you go to the cacollegepathways.org website that's up on the screen, there's a menu item that says Campus Professionals, and that will pull down a drop-down menu that one of the options is Resources. So if you click on that Resources page, it's called Campus Support Programs Leadership Guide, and so there's a link there. We also do have some hard copies of that document available that we have printed, and so you can also email me if you would want me to send that out to you in hard copy, but you can also just download it from the website. If folks have other questions, feel free to go ahead and send them in. We have another question about somebody who's writing in at a private school. They're at the infancy stages of creating support and wanting to know about private schools implementing priority registration. So I'll go ahead and answer this just to say that we didn't do research on this particular question of private schools, but we do know that there are private schools out there who are creating support for foster youth on their campuses. And if you go again to our website, if you look at any of the top 4 drop-down menus, you'll see an option for Find Campus Support Programs, which brings up a database of all the campus support programs in the state. And you can actually search that database. Either you can look just for community colleges or CSU or UC or private institutions. So you can actually do a search. There's maybe 3 or 4 universities up there that have established programs for foster youth in the private university context. And so, and contact information for those campuses is listed, so you can definitely reach out to them and find out what they're doing on their campus in relation to priority registration. So I think that's probably all the questions that we're going to have time for today. And so I want to once again thank everybody who participated in the web seminar, to everybody who sent questions, and of course to all of our panelists, Nick and Emily, Paulette and Dirisha. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And I want to give an especially big shout out to Simone, both for her great work today on this web seminar, presenting the information, and all of the work that she's been doing over the past several months to put together this report so that it's available for you. If we didn't get to your question, the couple folks sent in some questions that were more sort of technical details about how priority registration works. Feel free to go ahead and send me those questions by email, and I can do some research. They're not questions that I have answers to off the top of my head, but I'm happy to do some research to sort out some of the answers to the more technicalities about how the law is supposed to be implemented, and some questions about the new regulations from the Chancellor's office. Feel free to send me those follow-up questions as well. And again, we will be sending out the full report and a copy of this presentation to everybody who was on the web seminar today by email. One final thing I want to say is that in that email, you will also be receiving a link to a survey. It's very brief, just 5 quick questions about your experience on today's web seminar. It's really helpful to us to be able to get that feedback. So if you can take just a few minutes to respond to the survey, we would greatly appreciate it. And that ends today's web seminar. Thank you very much.